Welcome everybody at this webinar, which is in a series of webinars that we're doing on behalf of the publisher iOS Press. Welcome. And we're very pleased to host this webinar for the journal Environmental Policy and Law. I would like to thank our sponsors for making this webinar possible. Big thanks to the Olof Palme International Center, the Global Pact Coalition, the International Council for Environmental Law, the IUCN, of course, World Commission on Environmental Law, and the Jawaharlal Nehru University. Many thanks. Without them, this was not possible. So we, the publisher and Environmental Policy and Law, are very grateful. Let's start with this webinar. We're very happy to host this as a platform for discussion and to share ideas and to have a further discussion. It will be led by Bharat Desai, the editor-in-chief of the journal. And with that said, I hand the floor to you, Bharat.
Okay, yeah, welcome to everyone. Thank you very much, Martin, for facilitating this platform on behalf of the iOS Press and our journal, Environmental Policy and Law. We are very happy to have this webinar series, as we have almost decided almost twice a year. One will be probably on 5th of June on the World Environment Day, and on 10th of December on World Human Rights Day. And probably we're almost trying to turn EPL apart from our special series of those special issues on series of those I would call it global problematic which we just had on Martin has a cover on his at his back and envisioning our environmental future, which we did on 3rd of June at the time of the Stockholm Plus 50 conference. And we are already slated for some special issues actually as a follow-up to our this webinar series on the human right to sustainable environment, which we already planned. We have invited several scholars and practitioners to provide that contribution. And what we are actually doing is akin to something which a university department or a faculty of law would aspire to do. Through this, obviously, thanks to the access to technology. And I'm happy to welcome all our esteemed panelists who kindly agreed to spare the time to join this. We already had a first part of this webinar on 20th of September, just a few weeks after the 29th of July 2022, when the United Nations General Assembly adopted the resolution explicitly recognizing the human right to clean, safe and hygienic environment, sustainable environment. And so we thought that we will have a part 2. In the first part, we had almost 10 scholars and practitioners who joined the webinar on 20th of September. That video recording is already available. And for today's discussion, we had almost two esteemed colleagues and friends who had agreed to join. I think Professor Edith Brown-Weiss from Georgetown University, because of some last minute family developments, she's unable to join us today. We still expect Gunther Handel from Tulane Law School to join us, because it must be a little early for him. I think 7 o'clock New Orleans time. So we hope that Gunther will be able to join. And we're happy to have Christina. She's our board member, and of course, chairperson of the World Commission on Environmental Law, she's also co-chair of the Paris Agreement. So welcome to you, Christina. Thank you. And we have Claudia. In fact, incidentally, last time when we had the first part of the webinar, Claudia also sent me an invitation, So our almost, messages almost crossed each other, at that distance of about 1 hour on the same day. So we couldn't join. So we thought it would be best to invite Claudia to join this part 2 of our webinar, And Claudia is at Raoul Wallenberg, Institute, human rights and humanitarian law, and she has been working on the interface between human rights and environmental law for a very long time, with a special focus on climate change. So welcome to you, Claudia. We also have Professor Anupam Jha. He's a professor of international law at the Faculty of Law of University of Delhi. Anupam has been studying across several areas of international law, and he's one of the very eminent Indian scholars, and who has agreed to join us. So welcome to you, Anupam. Then finally, we have Professor Kamina Gunaratne. She is one of the very eminent, professor of law at, Sri Lanka Open University. She has been leading on the women's movement. She has been very active so far as Sri Lanka's, legal teaching and research itself is concerned. She has been also, working with some of the NGOs and some of the human rights, some of the critical issues, human rights issues in Sri Lanka, where she has been, making her voice heard. So welcome to you, Kamina. Now, what I would, plan to do, is to give a little background to both the context in which we are having this webinar. And as we know that there has been a flurry of developments, both in the forum of the United Nations Human Rights Council, which is a subsidiary organ of the United Nations General Assembly, and you could see the Human Rights Council as a part of its special procedures. There have been almost 5 special rapporteurs who have been entrusted with the task of, ranging from right to food to human right to sustainable environment to climate change, on human right of the environmentally sound management and disposal of hazardous waste and substances, and then human right to safe drinking water and sanitation. So there are 5 special rapporteurs who have been interested in different facets of the human rights challenge, and so that itself speaks about the engagement of the United Nations Human Rights Council, with this, and when this momentous development came, when on 8th of October 2021, when the Human Rights Council adopted its by now very famous resolution 4813. What the Human Rights Council sought to do was to put on a platter which has been almost universally been accepted. I think around the world, most of the sovereign states in their respective jurisdictions, through the policy and legislations, have also been accepted. Large part of the judicial architecture around the world has also given recognition to the right to sustainable environment, in various forms, various formulations, various terminologies have been used. But the fact remains that yes, environment has emerged as a preeminent human right. So what the Human Rights Council sought to do was to put on a substantial footing, what has already been practiced. But that recognition, acceptance itself was a very important part, And this was followed up by its political master, the General Assembly, as a political organ of United Nations, on 29th of July 2022, this year. And what is interesting is what the Human Rights Council sought to do has been almost replicated by the General Assembly. There is a difference in terms of the capacity, organizational competence of the General Assembly. And if you find the 3 operative paragraphs are verbatim same, they are identical paragraphs, which the General Assembly has sought to replicate in its own resolution. And this has, as far as the Human Rights Council was concerned, it was put to vote 43-0 and 4 abstentions, which included China, India, Japan, Russian Federation. And in case of the General Assembly vote, there was no abstentions. There were no votes against, So that spoke volumes about the General Assembly's competence and the role as a overarching plenary organ, to put on a high pedestal. And that raises some of the very seminal issues, and we sought to call out at least 3 important aspects. One is to try to explain the context and significance for rejoicing this General Assemblies and the Human Rights Council's emphatic recognition of the human right to clean, healthy, sustainable environment, which actually, dovetails into the Sustainable Development Goals 2030 and other rights and existing international law. So what the Assembly has sought to do, is it sought to keep that umbilical connection with the other rights and obviously the overall architecture of international law. Second, the normative value of the General Assembly resolution for the universality of environmental human rights. That where do we place? Although General Assembly resolutions are supposed to be non-binding, they are recommended in nature. But we know very well, largely what the scholarly realms talks about, that there are resolutions which have a high normative value. And where do we place, so far as this recognition of the environmental, human right to environmental sustainable human right is concerned. And thirdly, impact of the human right to sustainable environment on the treaty-based environmental and human rights obligations, observance of the human right of the individuals and inanimate objects, such as, as well as the domestic policies, legislations, litigations, So there's a broad range of, I would say, the issues which would arise as a follow-up to this emphatic recognition of the human right to sustainable environment, both by the Human Rights Council as well as the United General Assembly. So this is exactly on our platter and the menu. And I would like, our esteemed panelists, to try to put it in a scanner and try to give their take, as to how do they view about this, very significant normative development, and where do we go from here. So what I'll do is I'll, start with, Christina, and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Bharat. And actually, I'd like to start with a round of things. So first of all, I would like to say hello here from Oslo in Norway. And you can see maybe from the reflections here in my office that this is the time the sun sets in Norway. It's 2 p.m. It's a difficult time of the year, but I'm very happy to join you here today and discuss this very important issue that you just outlined to us, Bharat. But first of all, thank you. Thank you for your work with the Environmental Policy and Law Journal. I mean, you've been really instrumental in kind of raising it like the phoenix from the ashes and breathing new life into it. And I think this is very, very welcome. And we all recognize your dedication to the course that you do together with Martin Stavanger from IOR Press, who is joining us here today. And I just like, on behalf of the IUCN World Commission, I would like to thank you for that absolutely crucial work that you're doing there. The second thank you goes to the organization of this set of webinars on contemporary issues on environmental law / wider field of law. I think this is very welcome as well, because it gives a forum to discuss recent developments with legal scholars and practitioners involved in the field. And I think this is really also something that brings together that very important network of people that work in this field. And thank you, third, for inviting me today. That's very, very kind of you. So I saw the issues that you outlined and you briefly explained to us and the audience just right now about what you would like to focus on in this webinar. And I took the liberty of picking one, and that's the reason for why rejoicing the resolutions of the UN Human Rights Council and last year, and then the UN General Assembly this year on the recognition of a human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. And I'd like to provide 4 to 5 reasons that I've been able to identify for rejoicing, for positively welcoming the resolutions. There is a slight difference in the formulation of the resolution. So I will focus primarily on the resolution by the United Nations General Assembly from June this year, because that resolution recognizes the right of a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, period. The resolution from the United Nations Human Rights Council recognizes that right as important for the fulfillment of human rights. But what that means, I leave that aside. I focus on the UNGA resolution, which doesn't have that additional formulation. It just recognizes the existence of a human right for a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment in that first operative paragraph. As you said, there are more operative paragraphs, but I focus on that. You already mentioned that this recognition of that right is an important legal development because it has important normative value. And the question is, what exactly is that normative value? You indicated these resolutions, especially by the Human Rights Council and by the United Nations General Assembly per se, are not legally binding, so they don't have normative value as legally binding formulations. We all know that. But more normative value can go above and beyond what is legally binding. And as I said, I try to sketch out 4 to 5 of these normative effects of the resolution. The first one, in my view, is that recognition in the resolution of the existence of a human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment gives very important normative support and political support to those countries that already have such a recognition of the existence of such a right in their national laws, whether they're national constitutions or their national human rights laws or other laws. And there are over 100 countries, 100 states currently, I don't have the correct number because it's changing all the time, that have that in their normative binding domestic framework. And having an international recognition by the United Nations General Assembly gives a stronger legal weight to those existing rights in domestic legal frameworks, both in the implementation of these rights domestically, but also in the use by domestic courts. We all know that when courts look at rights, there's always a weighing and balancing involved, and having an additional international recognition of that right may help tilting the scale towards giving significant weight to that right of a clean or sufficient environment. So that's one important normative effect. The second one is that the recognition by the United Nations General Assembly also help to give support to existing regional and international human rights treaties that already recognize a human right to an environment of a certain quality. And we don't have many of these regional or supranational treaties. We have Article 24 of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. We have Article 4, Paragraph 1 of the Escazú Agreement that just entered into force fairly recently. And we have the San Salvador Protocol to the American Convention on Human Rights. That these are primarily or basically the only 3 international supranational treaties that already recognize such a right. And their implementation and their interpretation is being strengthened as we speak by that international recognition through the United Nations General Assembly, which had like over 180 supporters and only a couple of abstentions, no objections. When these treaties get applied, when these treaties are being interpreted by supra-regional courts, for example, the Inter-American Court on Human Rights and others. So that's an important support to those treaties. The third very important normative value lies in the potential interpretation of other human rights treaties that do not have or do not recognize yet an independent right to an environment of a certain quality. And I'm thinking, for example, about the ICCPR, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, or the Convention on the Rights of the Child, or the European Convention on Human Rights. All these post-war treaties have very important human rights, but are completely silent about environmental rights. And in their implementation and in their interpretation, the international recognition of a human right to a clean and healthy environment may come in very helpful. So we can, in a way, argue for an environmental conscious interpretation of non-environmental rights, which is being enhanced through that supranational recognition of a human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment by the United Nations General Assembly. And that is, of course, something that is absolutely relevant in the upcoming cases by the European Court on Human Rights, where a number of climate cases are pending. And we all know that the European Convention on Human Rights doesn't mention the word climate. And as I just said, it doesn't mention the word environment, but the right to life, Article 2, the right to private life, Article 8, and other rights will have to be interpreted in the light of environmental challenges, in particular climate change. And it is possible. We don't know what the judges in Strasbourg are going to do, but it is possible that that international recognition of a human right to a clean, healthy environment by the United Nations General Assembly may play in that interpretative process carried out in Strasbourg. But that remains to be seen. We don't know, but it could be. The fourth element, a normative element, is that the resolution, although not being binding, can be used by courts and judges in interpreting and deciding disputes or cases on their bench. And we've seen fairly, I don't want to say creative, but creative legal reasoning within their, realm of methodology. For example, when the district court in The Hague gave meaning and interpreted what duty of care means for a company like Royal Dutch Shell, it included non-binding and soft law considerations, the OECD guidelines for businesses in the interpretation of that unwritten duty of care. And it is possible that we can see, courts or judges using that international resolution by the United Nations General Assembly in the interpretation of legal concepts or principles like duty of care, like due diligence, giving meaning to terms that are not clearly defined, and thereby giving a normative value to that resolution. We've seen it before, and we may see more of that in the years to come. And the fifth, perhaps, legal implication of that UNGA resolution is that we may see the emergence of customary law. We may see the emergence of a customary legal recognition that there is an independent right to a clean and healthy environment. It can be said that we do see at least an opinio juris by the overwhelming support to that recognition. How it is with state practice is something that we still need to see and to discuss, but the argument can be made that this may be the beginning of an emerging customary norm in international human rights law, supported by that overwhelming support at the UNGA. So my point here was, or those 4 to 5 points were that the legal status, although not legally binding, shouldn't be equaled with a legal impact, with a normative impact of that resolution, which can be much wider than just squarely focusing on it being, a non-binding resolution. So we will see, or time will have to show how that resolution is being used in primarily implementation and probably as well adjudication, both on the domestic and international level. But we see that it potentially can enhance the implementation of many agreements, be it human rights agreements or be it environmental agreements, where we see the use of rights-based approaches across the board. We look at climate change, biodiversity, plastics. We see these terms, rights-based approaches, popping up in all different contexts. One potential challenge that I'd like to highlight at the very end is, of course, how exactly to define it. What exactly is the threshold of what defines a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment? These terms will need to evolve over time. They will determine states' positive obligations to protect human rights. They will determine what kind of corresponding duties states have. A right alone is not enough as long as we don't have a corresponding duty. And I have a feeling that judges and courts will play a significant role in bringing more content and substance to the bare recognition of that right. But these are issues that we will see evolving in the years to come. I stop here and thank you very much, Bharat.
Thank you very much, Christina, for spelling out this, the broad contours or the implications of this explicit recognition, at various levels, and I think that provides, it remains to be seen, how the momentum will develop, and how the sovereign states, the UN system, and host of other actors, they try to push the things, in a particular. Now, since you have other engagement, and you will need to leave early, so I thought maybe I'll just seek your quickly a view, as an extension of your these 5 bullet point which you have already mentioned, that do you foresee explicitly any since there is it's a soft normativity, it will evolve, there will be different interpretations, but do you foresee any possibility in terms of uh, elaboration or taking this forward in a hard law, in a hard instrument? For instance, the French have already been pushing for the global pact for the environment, for instance. So do you see that there could be some kind of a linkage, because they say could be there, or probably going or pushing for a third covenant, for instance, under the human rights instruments? Could be, can there be international covenant on environment, human right to environment protection, for instance? How do you see the in the realm of the future, as a scholar?
Yeah, I mean, as a scholar and maybe someone who's watching that space quite carefully, I think the legal development does not stop with the UN General Assembly resolution. That is a first step, a very important one. We do know that many of the proponents, in particular from civil society and others, are very, very happy that this resolution came about. But of course, the push is there and will be there for a legally binding recognition in the form perhaps of an international covenant on a human right to a healthy environment or something like this. Whether that's going to happen or not, that's written in the stars. But I think the push and the momentum will be there, and there will be initiatives that seek to bring it further. And we already see that perhaps within the legal, the European context, where there is a very strong initiative by the Council of Europe to look at the possibility of an additional protocol to the European Convention on Human Rights that is aiming at legally including a recognition of a human right to a clean, healthy environment. All these initiatives are either just beginning or have just started, but it would surprise me if the UNGA and Human Rights Council resolutions is the only thing we'll ever see. I don't think so. I think these are starting points, and there is more to come, but it will take time. It's something new. And we know that negotiations take time, but I think that the path is laid out, and we'll see who will walk it.
Okay, thank you, Christina, for spelling out the series of issues, putting them on table as to and various possibilities, that how the momentum itself will take, how the sovereign states will react, how the UN system will take it forward, how the Human Rights Council will do, or how even these 5 of the special rapporteurs in the Human Rights Councils, that mandate which had, how they themselves push it, including like David Boyd and others, who have been very, very in the in the forefront of these, pushing this, pushing the envelope further, so that remains. Thank you very much for your this excellent points. Now let me turn to Claudia. She has a excellent. She's based at the Raoul Wallenberg Institute in Lund, in Sweden, and she has been actively engaged with this. She already organized a similar symposium, I think, on the 20th of September, and we look forward to have your view. Over to you, Claudia.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much to organize. I think it's just so important, this initiative that take forward this discussion. And I also appreciate very much that our initiatives emerging from the Global South, because I think a lot of the actual developments that have happened and where a lot of the scholarly debates are very advanced are coming from the Global South. So I'm very happy to see that coming from this space, which as we see, it's also joined by many others from the Global North that I think at the core of these synergies. So I think we're living in a polarized world, a world with wars, a world with pandemic. So the fact that this UN General Assembly resolution is the evidence of the value of multilateralism. And I will make some points, and I would like to highlight the importance and the opportunity of linking this UN General Assembly resolution with solidarity. Solidarity as a principle, solidarity as a value, solidarity as something that we embrace in our society, no matter where we are or where we come from. So when we are talking about what are the impacts of the UN General Assembly resolution and the UN Human Rights Council resolution, we see this process of the international trickling down to the regional, national, local level. I'd like to invite you to see the other way around as well, because as we know, the resolution was the result, not only state-to-state negotiations, of course, that's the nature of these resolutions, but also the efforts of many right holders from all across the world for 5 decades. So I think the learning that we can gain of this bottom-up approach is also huge. And when thinking about that, I think it's really important because there is where we will find the clues for how to make this right a reality for people on the ground. That I think that's a lot what people are waiting for. They're waiting for changing in whether they can breathe a healthy air, whether they can give nutritious food to their kids in a diverse types of settings. We're thinking about whether you can drink or not tomorrow clean water, or whether you can get your kids to play in an environment that it's not toxic. So when we see these kind of issues, I think it's very important to ground them in those realities of those of us that are not living necessarily in cities, or of those of us that, I mean, are really taking this fight as a fight of life and death, for instance, in the case of environmental human rights defenders. So I think when learning about those processes, it's really, we have a huge opportunity to learn from processes that are emerging from the global south. And I'll give you just as an example, the process of the Escazú Agreement, and again, linking it to the principle of solidarity. So again, in this polarized world, it was then when the Escazú Agreement entered into force. As you know, the Escazú Agreement is focusing on which are the procedural elements, specifically information, participation, access to justice, to achieve the right to a healthy environment. And importantly also, this agreement recognizes the right to sustainable development, both of present and future generations. And something interesting of this agreement that can also give us clues of how to go about in terms of making the implementation of the UN General Assembly resolution is that it has cooperation as part of the objective of the agreement. So this is really important because many of the challenges that we are facing will not be able to be solved by one country. There are these challenges that go beyond borders, and also the collective action goes beyond borders to tackle these problems. A second example that makes this right to a healthy environment critical, and how we can learn from different rights, is the idea of environmental democracy. And this environmental democracy understood as part of these procedural rights that are helping us the realization of the right to a healthy environment, leaving no one behind. And here what it's important is that when we're talking about environmental law, if you see the Convention on Biological Diversity and others, the treaty refers to international cooperation understood as a state-to-state relationship. But if you see the further Conference of the Parties decisions and so on, it's increasingly understood that it's not only a state-to-state relationship, that right holders are also critical agents of change if we're about to achieve the objective of conservation, sustainable use, and access and benefit sharing. And here we can learn again from this Escazú Agreement in the sense that in its rules of procedures, there are specific mechanisms in which public participation can happen in the form of representatives of the public, which have specific seat within the conference of the party decision-making. So again, it's an invitation to go beyond the very limits of what we see, to also look at what's happening all over the world, to try to go beyond what we already have. Also, importantly, as opposed to, for instance, the Convention of Biological Diversity, you have a Committee of Review and Implementations in the context of the Escazú Agreement, which again will be an opportunity for right holders to also assess and provide information to the extent of how this treaty is being implemented or not. And my third point that again, I think we can learn for making the UN General Assembly resolution recognizing the right to a healthy environment a reality is this recognition of the role and rights of environmental human rights defenders. There's significant information about the number of killings of environmental human rights defenders. So what I would like to highlight here is, again, the principle of solidarity. The solidarity in terms of how environmental human rights defenders are safeguarding not only their future, but our future and the future of future generations. So the importance of seeing not only the risks, but also recognizes their agency and recognizing that those often framed as vulnerable situations, as people in vulnerable situations, are the ones on the forefront. And often it's not their weaknesses, it's the strength. It's not their failure, but their success, which makes them vulnerable because they are really questioning the status quo. So I would like to, in this sense, prompt you to look at vulnerability, not as a weakness, but as very interconnected with the need of solidarity. So that's why as scholars, as practitioners, no matter where we are, need to stand up for this right. And my final point is the right to a healthy environment, as we know, is broadly recognized in many national and now by the UN. But unless an intersectionality approach is infused in the implementation of this right, we won't get too far. If we don't address the critical power issues, for instance, in gender relationships, people may recognize this right. But if I'm a rural woman in which I don't have any land rights, when a proponent of a project comes, I won't be invited to the meeting. I won't have any decision making. So I would like to end by highlighting the importance of this intersectionality in implementing the right to a healthy environment. And if we link it to the solidarity principle, we can be thinking about intra-generational solidarity, intergenerational solidarity, solidarity between states, but also between right holders, north-south, south-south. And I think this is critical if we want to make the right to a healthy environment a reality for all. And we have huge opportunity. Now the Conference of the Parties of the Convention of Biological Diversity is taking place. So again, another venue to really make this right to a healthy environment matter and be embedded in the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia, for again, expanding the horizon, the range of this right, and the trying to factor in the actors, the drivers, and the processes which will really matter, to which actually made the give the push to the General Assembly and the Human Rights Council to explicitly recognize the right and how that can be taken forward, and there how the risk which really faced by a lot of people who really advocate, do the advocacy and push for this right in various parts of the world, including like Amazon and various areas where many of the environmental defenders have laid down their lives, to make this right reality. Actually, they are at the, you rightly said, that they are at the forefront. They are who really the one who take the brunt of this entire, because it's a very obvious reaction, in terms of how the this environmental developmental tug of war which takes place, as a environment as a necessity, and development also as one of the important prerequisites with the sovereign states, especially in the global south, which they have been. So there is a tension, there is an inbuilt tension there, and the question is, how does one gravitate out of it? But just if I can little take your view, trying to expand your view on how do you make it a reality, concrete. Do you have any concrete suggestions in terms of as a next step forward, which can be taken up, like both as a research agenda, some of the items which you yourself mentioned, as a making it a reality, probably that itself could be a project item, maybe at the Raoul Wallenberg Institute and several others, with the World Commission on Environmental Law and Max Planck Institute and others. Yeah, over to you.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good potential, but with more synergies between state-led initiatives and right holder-led initiatives. And I think bridging the capacities, and I'm here gonna be referring more into those with human rights expertise and those with the biodiversity expertise. I think these two communities of practice have huge in common, and yet they often don't know about each other. So I think there's, in terms of these bridging capacities, I'm not talking about capacity building, I'm talking about capacity bridging, in the sense that we all come with our different expertise, with our different knowledge. And in this case, human rights, lawyers and practitioners and biodiversity have a very important role to play. And very concretely, if the operational paragraph of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework includes strong language on human rights, including on environmental human rights defenders, or this proposed target to have a standalone target on gender equality, I think this provides opportunities for then states, together with right holders, to envision the pathways on making this a reality. So we do have many cases that we know right now about successful judgments. What I would like to see more is kind of, how do we prevent the damage being done in the first place? So I think in terms of the role of the executive functions of the state, it's very important and be able to have, for instance, baselines where we identify, okay, which is the baselines and how can we be going and progressively developing systemic actions and interventions that can help us really trigger this transformative change. We don't have time. We don't have time for very slow action. We need this transformative change, as highlighted by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. So we need to make this a reality. And again, supporting those often called vulnerable women, rural women, indigenous peoples, and local communities, supporting their efforts that they are already doing. I think that gives an enormous capacity and catalysis for this change.
Thank you, Claudia, for elaborating further on this issue. And I think let us hope, how the scholarly community, seeks to get engaged with this, unfolding challenge. Now, at this stage, before I turn to two of my panelists, I see in the audience our esteemed friend and colleague, Professor Nico Shrejwar from University of Leiden, and I tried to reach out to Nico, and I was pleasantly surprised to see Nico sitting here in the audience. And I would like to, if Nico, can you listen to me, Nico? Nico has been a professor of international law at Leiden University, and he's a member of the Dutch Council of States. Nico, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, please.
I listen with great interest.
If you wish, please, I would like to give you the floor if you would like to comment, because already Christina has raised some issues and Claudia has raised some issues. Probably your theme of, I think, your own contribution to the environmental policy and law in the last year's volume, especially how do you figure in the state sovereignty? How do you see the role of the sovereign states in this unfolding saga of the explicit recognition of the human right to environment protection? Would you like to comment upon it?
Yes, of course.
Please.
Very briefly, because you have very important speakers, and I listen to learn a lot.
Yeah, please switch on your video. Please just switch on your video. I think we can't see you.
But I'm not sure whether I can switch on my video.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, great. Hello. Hello, everybody. No, it was very interesting to listen to you. And of course, I know it's very popular to put sovereignty under attack. And basically, everybody feels, perhaps even daily, that we should try to do away with that concept. But it would be very unwise, because after all, in an imperfect world, with not very powerful international organizations, the state is still the prime layer of administration. And therefore, we have to inject sovereignty with general norms, with global values. So I'm very happy with indeed the emerging right to a clean environment. And I very much enjoyed the 4 or 5 impacts Christina already so ably identified. Indeed, you see a movement in the context of the European Court of Human Rights taken over at the level of domestic courts. You referred to the Shell case. That is an exciting judgment, perhaps with an even wider impact than the UNGA judgment, but I'm a little bit nervous whether it will be maintained, because we still have the High Court and the Supreme Court to put it to a legal test. And no doubt then this new resolution of the UN General Assembly and the earlier one by the Human Rights Council will be instrumental in solidifying the right to environment as an human right with an own standing. That will help to fill in. And also, Claudia, so it's very good that there is such an agreement. But even if not, the right to food, the right to an adequate living standard, the right to life can now also be filled in a more meaningful way with an environmental and, of course, allow me to say also sustainable development dimension. So I think it is fantastic, also that 164 states, if I'm not mistaken, have supported it. So hopefully it will also stimulate the recording of the rights at the national level. Bit by bit, I make a plea for it in the Dutch Council and through the Dutch Council of States to the Ministerial Council and Parliament, but we are far away from that. But if we see the strong judgment by our Supreme Court in UNGA, if you see what the Bundesverfassungsgericht has stated in the Neubauer case, something is on the move. And all these elements, as Christina also said, paved the way. And indeed, we have to see who will walk on it, but more and more there is a way to walk over, just to quote the words of Christina. So that makes me very happy, but I'm eager to learn more from you. So I stop. And once again, thank you so much for organizing this, Bharat.
Yeah, but perfectly fine. Thank you very much, for your input, and especially your insistence and underscoring that yes, sovereignty cannot be wished away. That is a fact of life. It is a reality. The entire international system revolves around the state sovereignty. But do you foresee, like the way in which the General Assembly resolution has got almost that kind of a support, I think, and do you see any kind of a concrete movement towards, having a crystallization of a international legally binding instruments, which could be taken as a maybe third covenant or something, in the human rights instrument.
I'm a little bit in doubt whether we need new treaties. Of course, at the level of the European Convention and perhaps also other regional conventions, it's a bit more easy that you can conclude a protocol. And of course, my dream would be that we draft a brief protocol and have that attached to the two existing covenants, because that is the way to mainstream it in both civil and political rights and economic, social and cultural rights. So basically, I'm not in favor of a third covenant or a separate treaty. I feel that to integrate it in a systemic way by making it part of it, and I know it is still a very long way to go, and it's maybe just an illusionary ideal, but steps in the direction are of course resolutions, but maybe also a general comment, a joint general comment by both the Human Rights Committee, the Economic, Social and Cultural Rights Committee, the Women's Rights Committee, the Children's Rights Committee. It's not easy to achieve. I served for 8 years on a treaty body, and there is unfortunately not an automatic cooperation, but we should push for that. And so there are all kinds of legal opportunities to push it, in addition to perhaps the faraway ideal of a separate treaty.
Okay, I think that's perfectly fine. I think so we'll see how the wind blows and how the situation evolves in the coming months and years. Thank you very much, Nico. Joining us, at this, impromptu, invitation, and please stay on. Thank you very much. Now I'll turn to our other panelist, Kamina Gunaratne. She's a professor of law at Sri Lanka Open University, and she has been very active so far as the women's issues are concerned, and host of other issues, under the prevailing Sri Lankan situation concerned. Over to you, Kamina.
Okay. Thank you, Bharat, and to the EPL Journal for inviting me to this webinar. The disadvantage of going later is that sometimes what you want to say has already been said. But nevertheless, I will just talk about some of my reflections on this new General Assembly resolution. So it was passed in July this year, and it is a very, very welcome development. But it perhaps may be also somewhat overdue. In many instances, it is development in the international sphere that drives and influences law and policy at domestic level. But in this instance, it appears that it is the reverse that has actually taken place. As of now, the right to a clean and healthy environment has been recognized in the jurisprudence of many countries all over the world. And particularly in the region of South Asia, where both our countries come from, courts have recognized the right either holistically or to particular components of the environment, such as water. The right has also, over the last 2 decades, been incorporated into constitutions all over the world. Modern new constitutions are now incorporating socioeconomic rights, including the right to environment, again in different formats, again holistically or to different components. The wording is very diverse. It has been incorporated both as a fundamental enforceable right and also perhaps more weakly on the chapter on state policy, like in the Constitution of Sri Lanka. Where a constitution does not have an explicit right to the environment, courts have been very innovative and have interpreted it by way of either the right to life or the right to equality, right? And this jurisprudence again is coming pretty much, a lot of it from our part of the world. And a lot of these environmental rights in the Constitution also explicitly refer to issues like food and water security and energy security, all which cover socio-economic rights, right? So now in this background, while we see that this resolution is very timely and welcome, as I said, it does seem to be a little reactive to developments in the domestic sphere and what has happened at national level for some time. So the question to me is, at this point of time, what impact can this resolution have on further developing what has been going on? I think it will have an impact. And as both Bharat and Christina have said, its normative value should not be underestimated. And that is the second point I would like to pull up. And when I read the resolution, the point that struck me as the most significant is the acknowledgement that all rights are indivisible and interrelated, as it has been expressed in the preamble. And the preamble starts off by citing all the human rights documents, the relevant documents, human rights and environment, starting from the UN Charter through the UDHR, the two covenants up to Stockholm and Rio declarations. It also explicitly says that all human rights are universal, indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated. And I think particularly coming from the global South, that aspect is extremely important. So both the right to environment and the right to development have been classified as third-generation rights. I always found this categorization and hierarchy very problematic. But one positive factor is that the third-generation rights do bring together the two categories of the first and second generations. And there is this acknowledgement that the civil and political rights on the one hand and the social and economic rights on the other cannot be bifurcated, and they must be viewed holistically. And as I said, this is particularly important in our part of the world where we are continuing to deal, and we will always deal for the foreseeable future with issues of poverty, food insecurity, water and energy scarcity, and general decline in living standards. And at the present moment, this has exacerbated to a great extent. Now, in addition to that, a lot of our countries are also grappling with issues of poor governance, corruption, autocracy, decline in the rule of law. And these also contribute to both to the violation of human rights and to the destruction of the environment, and to also forms of misconceived development that is both environmentally bad and which does not carry much benefit for the people of the country. And now again at this present moment, where the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals, where the deadline is fast approaching us, at this moment we seem to have stalled by global developments, including the Ukraine war. And human rights across the world has regressed. Democracy across the world appear to have regressed. Climate change appears to be an increasingly insurmountable problem, notwithstanding the latest COP. And the well-being of both humans and non-human species is going to be seriously endangered. And extreme poverty is now affecting people not only in the what is called the developing world, but also in the developed world, right? So in the context of all that, the reinforcement in the resolution that rights are indivisible is, to my mind, very significant. A healthy environment is, on the one hand, a precondition to food and water security. Energy security is also essential, but it has to be achieved without environmental damage, and that is a challenge. People obviously cannot achieve a life of human dignity in a degraded environment. People also need to be provided with shelter, health, education, and clothing. And none of this can be achieved without good governance and participatory democracy. And that has also been recognized. There's a lot of jurisprudence on that as well. So this in turn requires the upholding of the rights to equality, freedom of speech, freedom of association, rights to livelihood, and everything that is classified as civil and political rights, and which have over the years been given a lot of prominence over and above the socio-economic rights. We also need to look at issues of equitable land tenure policies, equitable regulation and distribution of water, equitable access to energy, just to name a few, right? Climate change adaptation is also going to bring new challenges in achieving this, and also in achieving the sustainable development goals, which is increasingly looking as if we are being seriously left behind. So both the civil and political rights and the economic and social rights have to form a holistic basis for the rights to both environment and development. And the reinforcement of the concept of indivisibility and interrelatedness may be the most powerful normative statement that is coming out of this resolution, and which in turn could reinforce and further carry forward the developments at national level. Point number 3 of the resolution says that the promotion of the human right to a sustainable environment requires the full implementation of the multilateral environmental agreements. I think it also requires the full implementation of the human rights treaties, including the 2 covenants and the various specialized treaties, particularly important because the human rights treaties are far more enforceable than the MEAs, which are pretty much soft law. With the treaty bodies, as we in Sri Lanka know, governments can be held accountable. So I think the human rights angle of the right to environment, again, the human rights and the environment angles again are indivisible and interrelated and need to be given equal importance, particularly because at the moment, it's the human rights treaties that are enforceable. This is just the significant point that struck me. So when we talk about the normative dimension and the normative significance of this resolution, maybe we can take it forward. And as Christina said, it can be used by courts and by policymakers and advocates to push forward not only the environmental degradation issue, but also the human rights issue. So I'll just stop there, and that is just something that I wanted to throw out.
Yeah, thank you, Kamina, for drawing attention to a host of other related, issues and placing the whole thing in a larger context, issues concerning good governance and democracy, because they will have a direct bearing so far as this, transposition of the environmental human right, in various jurisdictions is concerned and at the global level is concerned. And the situation is indeed quite grim, like the United Nations Secretary General himself said, in his inaugural talk at the Stockholm Plus 50 conference, saying that, please help us out, please rescue us from this global mess which we have created, and the executive director of United Nations Environment Program herself went there to the podium and said that, well, if Olof Palme and Indira Gandhi were alive, what would they have said, about the situation, saying that the current situation is not acceptable. So in that grim situation, and what again the UN Secretary General went to the Sharm el-Sheikh, at the COP27 meeting, on 19th of November, again pleaded, so that situation indeed seems to be very grim, in terms of the all warning signs suggesting what the Secretary General said, that a triple planetary crisis. And your input in terms of this global governance architecture, especially at the domestic level, like there is a regression so far as the, respect for the fundamental human rights are concerned, the deterioration in the governance architecture, the democracy, there is a strong pushback to the democratic traditions in the different countries. In that context, what do you suggest, probably as a way out, because then the countdown has started, and because we have to try to find the way out of this current situation.
Well, you yourself suggested a third covenant. And I think there is a comment by Professor Schreiber on the new draft, a new treaty on the right to development. I'm not sure whether that would be feasible, because we are forgetting the international politics of human rights and the environment. And I think earlier the right to development met with a lot of pushback from countries that were a little worried that they would be called upon to fulfill the right. I mean, a right has corresponding duties. So I think that will have to be worked out. And whether that such a treaty would be actually enforceable and how many signatories it would invite is a little doubtful. So maybe without being too ambitious, we should push the human rights angle of the right to environment. The Human Rights Council has also taken steps in their various general comments also, because through the treaty bodies, that would be more enforceable. And through the treaty bodies, the civil and political rights could also be more enforceable. So I think at this point, we need to be realistic about even in the international sphere, how far we could go. And I personally have doubts about a treaty on the right to development.
But I think, I think what Nico suggests, I think probably irrespective of the nomenclature, because many of the cases when the states and the scholars and the sovereign states also come up with the various ideas, there is already, as I said, flagged, the French initiative, pending for some time. The call was taken by the UN General Assembly on Global Pact for the Environment, although the Assembly did not agree that, they came out with a different kind of a declaration. So there is a parallel, kind of a movement which is going on, although they call it Pact for the Environment, but I'm sure whenever you talk about the Global Pact for the Environment, what Nico is suggesting, definitely the developmental dimension will be inextricable part of it, because it has to be a balancing between environment and development, So we don't know yet, if the French, really push for it. There is already the group of, jurists who have also been, are talking about it. So probably we don't know how the situation will unfold, in what direction it will go. So thank you, Kamina, for your take and comments on this. Now I turn finally to today's last speaker, my colleague, Professor Anupam Jha. Over to you, Anupam.
Yeah, good evening from India, and thank you, Environmental Policy and Law and iOS Press, for organizing this program today, and to give an opportunity to present my views on the eve of Human Rights Day. What can be a better tribute to the drafters of UDHR than to organize this event? I am particularly thankful to Professor Bharat Desai of JNU for taking the lead, not only to organize this program today and inviting me to the panel, but also for becoming the voice from Global South on environmental and human rights issues. His book, Envisioning Environmental Future, Stockholm +50, has contributed a lot to the scholarship from the Global South. His book has done laurels and has become very popular in these regions. Today's panel is a great combination of Global North and Global South. Please bear with me for my heavy voice today, because the weather here is a little bit different and difficult. But I have some points to make. It has been a long journey from Stockholm to this year's UNGA resolution. 1972 Stockholm Declaration. That was also a declaration. And UNGA resolution is far ahead from that declaration. It is a UN plenary body which is taking this great initiative to resolve that we recognize the right to clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as human right. That is very important, that as a human right, so human rights have different generations. And first generation are the civil and political rights. There we have no problems. Most of the countries of the world, they have tried to incorporate the treaty obligations into their national constitution or into their statutes. But exceptions are also there. Even the first generation human rights treaty has not been particularly favored by some countries like China. They say that they do not give that much priority to the individual's rights. They would give priority to economic rights. And therefore they favor the next human rights treaty, that is International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. So they say that we have the priority of economic rights. There should be equality, economic equality. So the third generation, if we say that human rights of having a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as a third generation human rights, it's a very good development, which can be helpful in making the normative values all over the world. But there are certain points which also may be made. And we must know that if countries like China and countries like India, their approaches are different. If we take the UNGA resolution, when the UNGA resolution was adopted, the country like India accepted the resolution, favored it, but then it has the problem that operative paragraph 1, it is not very clear. So this is the operative paragraph 1, and it is saying that clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, which is a human right. And India says that it's not clearly defining what is the meaning of clean, what is the meaning of healthy, and what is the meaning of sustainable environment. Perhaps the reason may be that India is facing a lot of poverty even today. There are around 200 million people who are below poverty line, and it needs development. There are a lot of development projects which are coming up and which may be implemented in near future. And therefore, what will happen as a result, that there will be carbon emission. And carbon emission is a difficult problem for the global south also. Although we say that US is the largest carbon emitting country, but then India is also not lagging far behind. We are also having a lot of carbon emission. But India's compulsion is that we have the poverty, which is blinding the whole great idea of clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. And perhaps the priority is that we should develop and we should bring out the people from the poverty. And therefore, India is sometimes slow in taking up this third generation of human right. Although we can say that the government is slow, but the courts in India, they have been proactive in implementing the international environmental law, the main principles of international environmental law. And we also have some domestic laws. And one of the important laws which has been made is National Green Tribunal Act, which is incorporating the principle of sustainable development and precautionary principle. So that is a very important development in India, and country which is having more than 1 billion population. But then we should also have to think that how and when we will reach a peak of carbon emission. What will be the peaking of carbon emission? And India has joined the Paris Agreement. And recently, last year, India said that we will be trying to peak our carbon emission by 2070. So it means that we will take almost 50 more years to continue to develop. And perhaps in the next 50 years, 200 million people will be taken out from the below poverty line. And this below poverty line is a very different line. It's very tricky, very difficult line. So it's very difficult to take out these people from the poverty line. But then government is trying, and therefore the fossil fuel capacity and non-fossil fuel capacity, that has to be also considered in a different manner. We have tried to generate non-renewable energy capacity, and it has been the declared view of the government of India that non-fossil fuel capacity may be increased by 500 gigawatts by 2030. So it means that India has an ambitious plan to in mitigation and in adaptation for the climate change. When this will happen, perhaps it will be good that we can cherish the clean and healthy and sustainable environment at the broader level. However, at the technical and at the judicial level, India's courts have been doing a wonderful job. And there are many examples where the highest court in India, they have implemented the sustainable development principle, the precautionary principle, the polluter pays principle. And therefore, India's record, at least in the judiciary, that has been very prominent in implementation of the international environmental law. So when UNGA resolution, when it says that the right to clean, healthy and sustainable environment is related to the other rights and existing international law, so it is very broad. It is saying that it is related to other rights and existing international law. So it links this right, clean, healthy and sustainable environment, with other rights and existing international law. So it's having a broad compass, and there are some countries, for example, US, which says that the operative paragraph 3rd, which says that human right to a clean, healthy and sustainable environment requires the full implementation of the multilateral environmental agreements under the principles of international environmental law. So again, these two paragraphs, the first paragraph is, although it's very, very broad, but then second, third paragraphs are not that much broad, but then some countries have reservations regarding these operative paragraphs. It means that although this resolution has been accepted by overwhelming number of nations of the world, but then if you look inside, we can see that many countries, they have put reservations, they have made some concerns, they have said that no, we have concerns regarding these operative paragraphs. So it means that this soft law, UNGA resolution, is a soft law. It may be difficult because we have the examples of Texaco overseas company versus Libya, where the arbitration panel, they had said that we can look at the circumstances, how a particular resolution was adopted. And therefore, when there would be a dispute relating to this UNGA resolution, these concerns raised by countries like India, China, US, and some other countries, that may also be considered by the court while deciding the legality of the UNGA resolution. However, it is a very happy development that Human Rights Council resolution has been reiterated by the UNGA. It means that if this resolution will be accepted across the United Nations bodies, perhaps this may take time, but then it may become customary international law. So we have the hope that in coming times, maybe it will take, so it depends. Sometimes customary international law may develop in not many long years. So maybe that we have the possibility that this may develop into a customary international law, but the possibilities are not very encouraging. And I have little doubts about it. However, I see that it's a great development, at least at the UNGA level, that this has been considered and recognized by the United Nations. So perhaps I should stop here.
Thank you, Anupam. Again, putting your finger on some other related issues, the compulsions, domestic compulsions of the country, so far as the giving effect to some of the rights are concerned, that probably, I think, as far as those domestic compulsions and considerations are concerned, it's not only limited to the countries with large mass of population, like India has almost that large mass of that population. But we saw in case of the what is called the flip-flops, as regards the United States attitude toward the Paris Agreement. We saw during the Trump administration in 2019, the Trump administration withdrew from the Paris Agreement. And when the Biden administration came in 2021, they came back to it. So there are obviously, the whole process is obviously driven by the domestic considerations, the compulsions of the countries, the developmental parameters, the energy constraints. There are huge number of those considerations which actually drive the attitudes of the sovereign countries, doing certain things or not doing certain things. So it remains one of the biggest challenge. Like Nico rightly flagged, the state sovereignty remains the fulcrum around which you try to do. Of course, there are other players like the transnational corporations, the civil society groups. There are other bodies. They are the drivers, and they are the forces which really push the thing, notwithstanding the overarching that kind of a huge potential capacity of the sovereign states. Then obviously some of the multinational corporations which might have their annual gross income which could exceed national incomes of some of the sovereign, that they have the huge potential. But notwithstanding those things, the very fact that the sovereign countries that they come around and try to buy this, and the very fact that at the plenary organ of United Nations this remarkable development taken place, and over the year we have seen that notwithstanding the fact that General Assembly resolutions are recommended in nature by virtue of Article 11 of the Charter of United Nations, they do have significant normative value. And as we see that in large number of these cases which we have been familiar with, that they have been either adopted without putting to vote unanimously, that also adds that kind of a value, and probably that sets the tone, and that is the reason why General Assembly is saying something as compared to the Human Rights Council, makes a difference, and probably it's a probably beginning of being taken serious. The question is what two issues which you mentioned, in terms of how that gets related to the other rights and the existing international law, as well as implementation of the multilateral environmental agreement. That remains one of the biggest challenge. So thank you for your input for this also. Now I think we have very limited time left, but if any of the panelists if they have any of the comments or suggestions or any reaction, please feel free to take the floor, and then maybe we'll throw the floor open if there are any comments, or any questions by the participants. So if there are no reaction or comments from the from the panelists, I'll throw the floor open for the participants. If any of the participants have any comments or any suggestions or any reaction, please feel free to speak up. or if you wish, you can paste your question in the chat box. So if there are no questions, there are no further comments, I'll just try to wind up, So thank you very much for all the panelists, for spelling out trying to spell out the contours of these, remarkable normative development, in the form of the United Nations General Assembly, as a follow-up to what the Human Rights Council of the United Nations itself, the General Assembly subsidiary organ, has sought to do. And I think there are, like all the panelists have rightly mentioned, those issues ranging from, what kind of implications, and probably it's this resolution of General Assembly is likely to be cited and recited, in various processes that it has already set the tone, various conference of party meetings, the decisions of some of the subsidiary bodies, for instance, or maybe other forums, and the host of those actors and the processes at the regional level and the domestic level. I'm sure that the General Assembly resolution has set the tone, and it all depends, how this, although it's very crisp, probably it has a huge potential. Everything cannot be, like several states have had the reservations, everything cannot be spelled out in the General Assembly resolution. That remains to be seen, as to how the whole process will be taken forward, in the months and years, by various other actors. And I think probably in this respect, the research institutions and the scholars have a role cut out for themselves, because it's they who will try to make sense, And as I already mentioned, we've already taken the initiative in the Environmental Policy and Law Journal to have a special issue of the EPL, next year. In the issue number 2 and 3, we have already earmarked as a special issue on human right to sustainable environment, and we have already, sent out invitation to some of the speakers, some of the scholars, to contribute. Several confirmations have come, but we'll be open to suggestions if there are other offers, and to contribute, because we'll need to have it, by around 15th of February 2023. So we have at EPL, we already taken the initiative to have a special issue carved out, but there are, as I said, there are many other processes in the scholarly realm where universities, research institutions, and a host of other actors, shall have to take a call so far as this very, very, very proactive affirmation of the human right to clean, healthy and sustainable environment, and on the global level itself is concerned, And I think that the work is already cut out for everyone. It remains to be seen. Notwithstanding the challenges, there are concerns. Obviously, will be, and sovereignty will remain one of the biggest kind of a concern, because you cannot, like Nico rightly said, that it cannot be overlooked. It cannot be bypassed. It has to be factored in. Sovereignty has to be factored in, and question will be how far we can make the sovereign states, to concede the ground, to accept the reality, to see that, for instance, from the prism of the, rights of the present and the future generations, for instance, that how we will be able to, take the movement, forward so far as the translating this, emerging right, into a concrete form, whether it takes a form of a hard kind of a legally binding instrument is concerned, or probably some other form it will take, So I'll stop here, and I thank each of the panelists, including Christina, Claudia, Nico, Kamina, Anupam, all the panelists. Thank you very much for making this discussion very lively and very, very, very fruitful. So I'll just stop here, and I'll give floor to my colleague Martin Stavanger. Over to you, Martin, to propose a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Bharat, and thank you for moderating this webinar, and thanks also to all the panelists. It was a great session. The session is recorded, and I'd like to add that it will be added to the library of webinars on the Environmental Policy and Law website, where it will be stored and will be publicly available for all. It's one of those activities that we do for the journal. Next to the special issues, as Bharat mentioned, We also have a special section of the Centers of Excellence in this domain. We continuously add additional information. And like I said, this webinar will be there. We have two webinars that we organize now on a yearly basis. One is in June and the other one is in December, where we are now. So the next one is already coming up in June. And I gladly invite everybody to make a note in the calendar to join in that webinar at that time. And for now, I'd like to say thank you so much for joining. And I look forward, and we look forward to see you join again at the next webinar. Bye-bye for now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Martin. Thank you. Thank you, all the panelists and all the participants. Thank you very much. Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye.